Right, so a couple of seconds, you should now see my screen. So today we're going to talk about real-time unified security for the endpoint. And the endpoint to us means your laptops, server machines, desktop machines, etc. It's everything where you're running code. We want to take a different approach to the virus problem, to the whole malware problem, because it's not just viruses, there's all sorts of additional components that fit into that set, including Trojans and exploits and the rest of it. So we believe that just taking the approach of looking for what you know is bad already, in other words, things you've already seen, simply isn't sufficient. And that's borne out by the kind of things that we see happening on every site every day. New pieces of malware are getting through because they haven't been seen before and there is no signature for them. So we believe you need complete visibility, so you've got to see everything that's happening on the endpoint, and that's got to be done without any impact on performance. We've got to do that, and we've got to understand what's happening from that. So we need dynamic behavioral analysis to understand what those processes are actually doing. So with visibility, we then need to process that information to understand what's happening. And then when we see something that's not right, we need to be able to act, and act quickly. So we look for fully automated mitigations and fully automated remediation options. And that's where SentinelOne fits. Gartner regard us as a visionary because we were the only endpoint solution that provides prevention, detection, and response, the three sides of the security triangle, in one agent. We are AV-Test certified, so avtest.org has certified us as a valid antivirus replacement. We are an antivirus tool, so we can be used in any location where antivirus is required. So how's it done? In our analysis, it's clear that the attacks of today, the endpoint is a major target. It's the origin of most attacks. 95% of successful breaches originate at the endpoint. Then the attack may pivot from the endpoint and move on to other targets within the organization, but 95% of them start with a breach of an endpoint device. And that could be your laptop, it could be a server in the server farm, but those are the targets. They're the weakest link, especially when there's a user in front of them. We don't think antivirus, the current approach, is any match for the new threat landscape. The new threat landscape consists of many more kinds of attack than we were previously having to deal with, or at least maybe we were previously aware of. We now have that visibility and we can see the different kinds of attack taking place. So we need to be able to deal with the malware groups, that's ransomware, Trojans, worms, backdoor systems, and that includes those pieces of malware that are delivered as files, so the payload is downloaded as a file object and committed to the file system locally on the endpoint, but also fileless, memory-based malware. Increasingly, we're seeing the number of attacks that are using fileless approaches increasing on a regular basis. Our own statistics bear out this fact from our servers, from live servers. We see approximately 30% of the current attacks do not include a file as the web payload delivery mechanism. You might wonder how that's done. Well, for example, if you go to a website, you may visit a website you've visited 1,000 times before, but today they've found a weakness in it. They've seeded that website with additional code, typically in an iframe or similar components, and now when you visit that website, you will be infected. And that infection, if they've done it using the technique that many are using now, will go directly into memory. It will not reach the file system. So any of the components you're using that are needed to see and look for malware in files will be defeated, which is, of course, why they're doing it. Then there are exploits. Exploits consist or make up approximately another third of the attacks that we're seeing. And exploits are where you open a document or receive a PDF file, maybe an invoice or similar, maybe an Excel file or a Word object. And that object contains an exploit, maybe a buffer overflow in the way the document has been put together to cause code embedded within that document to be executed using a vulnerability within that application. So they're application-based exploits. And then we have the third category, live attacks. This is where the attacker has some form of remote access or maybe even direct keyboard access, and they're using PowerShell or WMI scripting or Visual Basic scripting or any other form of interactive attack. And they will, through that, be able to escalate privilege, install additional malware, which goes back to the malware and exploits component, and pivot on that system to get further access into the rest of your network. So those are three categories. Conventional antivirus is going to have a problem with most of that. So that's the problem. Legacy antivirus vendors cannot respond fast enough. So 95% of the malware showed up that we see was only available or in use, active in the wild for 30 days or less than 30 days. 4 out of 5 variants that we see lasted less than a week. In other words, the campaign was over, launched and done in less than a week. Well, that means if it takes an antivirus vendor a few days to find out about it, a few days to analyze it, a few days to create a signature for it, that, well, it's too late. By the time they've created a signature and started to distribute that signature, they will have missed the campaign. And that's what we're having to deal with now. So let's look at the different approaches that can be used to deal with this problem. So we've touched on it already. Legacy antivirus vendors plus their additional components are prevention focused, which is a good thing. Stopping it before it ever starts is always the best approach to use. Unfortunately, the attackers know about this and are ready for it. So by trying to stop things that we know about in advance, all they have to do is make sure that you don't know about them. And so by creating variants and packing the existing malware they have so that it looks different, they're able to bypass the existing antivirus mechanisms. So the problem there is, in order to get a good coverage, you need to add additional components in order to get visibility. So that often means multiple agents and more tool sets. So some forensics tools, for example, so you can verify what's happening on the endpoint, and some remediation tools to deal with the situation when the antivirus wasn't able to detect it. And of course, we still suffer from that deficiency problem of the legacy-based antivirus signature technologies. Okay, so that's the legacy technology. There are new technologies coming up which are scan-based. So they do predictive analysis, and we'll talk about that ourselves. It's a technique we are working on and have included in our own product. It's able to scan the file system and examine those files, not just for signatures, but for characteristics within the structure of those executable files which show that they are malware. So by carrying out a machine learning exercise, it's possible to get an understanding of the structure of files and the components within those files which are related to malware, and through that extend the prevention capability. This is a good thing as well. There are problems with that, however. In order to analyze it, you must have a file. So of course it's limited to file-based malware. And the algorithms themselves do need constant tuning by experts to respond to the constant changes that we're seeing in the malware landscape. But it is a useful tool. The third approach is to admit that the antivirus doesn't work and therefore to look for it after its effects. So we call it EDR, and that is detection and response. By looking at using that approach, what we do is scan the systems for indicators of compromise, IOCs, and use that approach to examine what has happened on the system and look for things that we can do about it. This is often has on its own, it has no prevention mechanism. It relies on other tools in place, other agents and other mechanisms. So for example, legacy antivirus has a mechanism for understanding and preventing what's going on. And also it requires specialized personnel to operate a security operations center to carry out that searching and that mitigation and remediation and forensics. So it's a complicated and potentially expensive approach to it. But if we look at the three mechanisms together, prevention, analysis and detection, and the ability to have search and response, together that forms an interesting approach to the problem. But of course, if you do that with multiple vendors, that's going to be expensive and complicated to manage. However, if we distill that into the principles, what we have is the approach of pre-execution, on-execution and post-execution processing. In other words, prevention, detection, and response, the security triangle. Well, this is what SentinelOne provides. We provide pre-execution protection, and that is cloud intelligence, which is our own intelligence service, constantly updating the agents with whitelist and blacklist items, blacklists being signatures of known bad malware. So if we know it's bad, we don't let it run. On top of that, we have advanced static prevention. In other words, we do deep file inspection, allowing us to determine from the structure of a file if we believe it is going to be a particular malware. So we have static signature-based technologies and static pre-execution file analysis. But more than that, we have on-execution. We know that the attackers are constantly finding a way over, under, through, or around the defenses and prevention mechanisms that we put in place. So it's important that we have something that works at the point where the malware can no longer hide. This is our dynamic malware detection and dynamic exploit detection, the behavioral analysis. So this is at the point of execution. We examine exactly what's going on, we track everything on the system, and we build a picture of context of everything that's happening on the system. From that, we're able to determine, based on our machine learning exercise, what is a malware that is taking place, based on its runtime characteristics. What is it doing on the system? And at that point, once we determine that it is malware, we can hand over to our post-execution capabilities, which includes automated mitigation, policy-based, remediation, and forensics. And all of this is provided in a single agent.
And that's something you're going to be showing in a moment, isn't it, Tony?
Indeed, yes. I'll do a demonstration of that. So looking at the platform approach that we've built, we have dynamic whitelisting and blacklisting, updated by constantly by our cloud intelligence service, and that blocks known bad files that we're constantly updating, just like any other antivirus vendor. We also have another prevention mechanism in that layer, and that is the deep file inspection. That's the static analysis of executables before they are allowed to run, and that allows us to determine a whole other group of malware. That is limited, of course, to files. If you don't have a file, you have nothing to analyze, but it is a useful tool in that prevention mechanism. We then move to our on-execution phase, and this is our dynamic behavioral analysis. We manage and monitor all memory all the time, all activity, all process-to-process communication, all network activity, all disk activity, all of the time. And we do that with an agent that does it with very little impact on the system. Our agent is typically about 70 megabytes of memory and less than 4% of CPU on average throughout its running day. So it's a very small and lightweight agent. And that helps us deal with all other categories of malware. Files, memory-based malware, because we see it in memory and we see its behaviors and we see its interaction with processes and the operating system. And of course, because they also run in memory, we're able to monitor and see exploits taking place and script-based attacks. So we see everything that's happening on the system. And as soon as we see the behaviors in combination that tell us it's malware, we can then move to our automated policy-based response. Mitigations like killing the processes, quarantining the files. We also have the ability to disconnect the device from the network, to isolate the device, to quarantine the device itself on the basis of the policy. We have remediation. Because we're operating at the point of execution, we also need to be able to deal with the situation of malware that has done something on the device. So of course we have remediation, the ability to undo the damage that's been carried out on the system. And that includes rollback. So with rollback, we can restore the full system to its state before the malware began to run. On top of that, we also have auto-immunization, which means that we detect something dynamically on one device, tell all of the other devices about it, and that feeds in to their local blacklist, meaning that they would not run it if they see it. So that's the platform approach that we've built. Prevention,
Tony,
detection, and response.
Tony, can you briefly, just briefly mention how you can do the rollback mitigation if the device is disconnected from the network?
So if it's disconnected from the network, the only way that that could take place is if the policy included automatic rollback at that time. Otherwise, we would be waiting for the device to come back online, and we could then manually carry out a rollback from the smart center, from the management center.
But if one particular port that's opened?
Yes, it's the agent reaches out to the management server on HTTPS, so a standard port that doesn't require any significant changes to anyone's networks. Oops, sorry, a couple of clicks there. So yes, the management server itself is cloud-based or on-premise. Most of our customers, about 95% of our customers, use the cloud-based management server, but we do have a few who prefer the on-premise deployment. To us, it makes no real difference. It is just software, after all. As I mentioned, we have agents for lightweight agents for Mac, Linux, and Windows. That's Windows Server Editions and Linux Server Editions. So to summarize, what we have is a multi-layered protection across all major threat vectors. We provide full visibility, and through that we also have that dynamic whitelisting and blacklisting to reduce the overall attack surface. We then have advanced static prevention. Our deep file inspection engine covers known and unknown malware before it starts to execute. We recognize, however, that won't be enough because not all malware is delivered as a file, and therefore we have behavior-based threat detection at point of execution, allowing us to see everything that's happening on the system. A little more on that deep file inspection. It's a major breakthrough for us in the signatureless detection within our system. It uses an analysis where we've carried out an analysis of millions of samples of known good and known bad malware, and has allowed us to determine some 31,000 plus unique file characteristics, which allow us to distill that into an algorithm, which means the endpoint agent can make that analysis before a file is run at high speed. In fact, our deep file inspection engine examines files at the point they're dropped on the system. So as soon as they touch the file system, they can be examined. It's supported on all endpoint platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux. And the engine supports all of the mitigation actions. So what we also have in the agent, of course, is that visibility. So we have full context forensics, so we can see everything that's happened on the system and everything that is happening on the system using our forensics tool. And that's in the same agent across all platforms, giving us very light footprint on the system, but still significant capabilities in terms of visibility through to the management service. We'll look at that a little later. We also have, as I mentioned, that policy-based response capability. So in this, we can see here actions can include just alert, if we wish, alert and kill, alert, kill, and quarantine of known malware or unknown malware at the point of detection. We also see in the policy the option for autoimmune. That allows us to tell other components in our network about unknown malware that we've detected. And also in there is disconnect from the network, the ability to quarantine the device from the network automatically at the point malware is determined. The choice of which policies you apply are entirely down to you, and the policies themselves can be different for different groups. So we have groups of devices, and each group has its own policy. Built into that, as we mentioned, is cloud intelligence, and that allows us to constantly update the endpoint with new and updated information about new malware types, so as they are determined and found. And that includes the behaviors as well. So quickly summarizing before we move to the demo, we have superior detection based on advanced threats without a performance overhead, and that's important to us. We needed to make it lightweight on the endpoint. Everyone's fed up of having antivirus hog the system. Automated threat mitigation at machine speed. We don't believe telling you you've got a problem and then waiting for a human to deal with it is generally going to be sufficient. It needs to happen very, very quickly. We have the ability to carry out forensics, to visualize that attack in real time so that we can see and understand what's happening on the system. And we can also, through our cloud-based intelligence, continuously and seamlessly update the endpoints with the latest threats. And by combining multiple functions in one agent, we're able to cut the total cost of ownership of this solution by up to 5 times over multi-solution approaches. And that doesn't even begin to examine the costs of managing, training, and looking after different systems. So ultimately, we're able to protect user endpoints and data center servers with a single platform. So we look at that multi-platform versus the unified approach. In one agent, we have a single lightweight agent that provides single management console for all of those different platforms, fewer engineers required, and a much reduced total cost of ownership, especially when compared to running multiple agents and multiple management systems. So that's pretty much it when it comes to SentinelOne. I'll do the demo shortly. We are a certified antivirus component. We're also examined for the use in HIPAA and PCI environments and certified for those. We have a proven track record now. We have the #1 retailer in the world is one of our customers. The #1 internet television network is one of our customers, etc. And we are recognized. Gartner sees us as a visionary, and we are acquiring awards from various other organizations as we go. On top of that, we also recognize that nobody in this game can possibly get it right all of the time. And if you come across people who say they will stop everything all the time, they cannot do that. The attacker is constantly creating new versions of attacks, new systems, and new approaches. And inevitably, they will find a way over, through, under, or around any defenses you put in place. We recognize this. So we are one of 2 companies in the world that provide cyber guarantee. That's up to $1 million of cyber insurance built into our product. So that's up to $1,000 per affected endpoint if we're not able to return the system to a working state. Okay, time for a demonstration. So bear with me just a second. This is my Windows platform we're going to use, and I'll introduce the management server now. So here's the, whoops, wrong one. Here's the cloud-based management interface. I'll log in. We have 2-factor authentication, so I'll just put in my additional code. That's stored on my device, so I have to access, in fact, my phone in order to get that component. There we go. That's a one-time password component. So this is the management interface. It's very clean and very simple on purpose. Our engineers work very hard to keep a clean, simple interface, especially around the workflows. Here we can see this system is showing that we have no current problems. I do have 18 systems that have the agents out of date. If I click on that, I can see some of those agents need updating. I'll deal with that later. But I have 0 infections currently. This is the dashboard. This is the working list for anybody responsible for responding to anything that may be happening on the site. If they saw something here listed as it is, that means the policy on the endpoint was alert only, or alert and kill. We regard something that has been killed as still having the potential to run again. So if it's only been killed, then, and that's based on a policy, then it is still there to be examined and analyzed. We have mitigated. Most of our policies would be alert, kill, and quarantine. So we would see most events appear here. And of course, we have blocked. Blocked means it was detected either by signature-based analysis pre-execution or by the deep file inspection engine before it ran. So those are the categories we would see. Activity, a further tab down. This is our log file. It just shows everything that's happened on the system. And we can filter it to look at different views of exactly what's happened. Here we see a particular laptop has gone offline, and here's one coming online. Our Analyze menu, this allows us to go back and carry out forensics on previous events on our system. So we can go to any one of those and carry out forensics. I'm going to show forensics on a live piece, so I won't show that just now. We then have Network. Network shows all of the systems and the groups that we are looking after. And in fact, one of these systems, if I go down to UK development, that's Tony Demo 2 Win7. That is in fact this system here. This is this Windows system over here. And we can see from that that it's in the UK development group with the UK development policy. So let's have a quick look at that policy. So go to settings.
Only a quick question.
Yes, yes.
Quick question. When you refer to groups, does that link in with Active Directory groups?
Yes, yes. We are able to sync with Active Directory and take device groupings from there. So here we are. This is the policy for UK development. It's currently set to alert, kill, and quarantine. I'm going to modify that because I want us to be able to see the forensics. So I'm going to change it to alert only. Now that's a really strange thing to do. I will switch off disconnect from the network as well. So this is a really policy that's not going to do anything. I'll save that. That policy change will apply to the agent in the next 10 seconds or so. So this is set to alert only. That means I'm going to let the malware run all the way through so that we can look at the forensics capability so that we can see what the malware did. Not something I would advise people to do if you're not familiar with malware. So there we are. Alert only is how it's set at the moment. Going back to the network, I can click on Tony and I can get quite a lot of information about that device already, what version of operating system it's got, how much RAM it's got, what version of agent is currently installed on it. And I can see he's online and the network is enabled. From here I can also see which applications are installed on the system and of course any running processes that are currently on that system as well. So even before any event takes place, I can carry out various forensics. So going over to the Windows device now. So remember, this is alert only. Any malware I run is going to be, it's going to allow it to run all the way through essentially. So what I'm going to do is look at some malware samples. If I open a folder, we've got some samples there. If I open pictures, for example, everything I'm doing is being watched all the time by the SentinelOne agent. So this behavior is being watched. At the moment, that's not regarded and hasn't done anything malicious. So me opening a folder and looking at some pictures hasn't created a malicious event. What I'm going to do now, however, is I'm going to open some malware samples. Now these are password protected on my system. I'll drop these both onto the system. They're password protected. That's enough to defeat a lot of antivirus sweeps, of course. If it's an encrypted file, they can't see what's in it. So first of all, I'm going to run Vipassana. Now Vipassana is the payload, so it's a file object in this case. It's the payload that's often used and delivered as part of a drive-by attack when you visit various websites. So I'm running it as though I've gone to a website, opened the website, and the payload has been downloaded automatically to me. And that's it. The threat was detected and blocked straight away. So this was a known bad. If we go back to the console, we can see here it was a known bad executable and blocked straight away, just like any antivirus component would do. If I analyze it, it's not going to give me very much. It shows me nothing happened, it didn't do anything. But here we can see that it was known as a high risk, and there was its signature. We could take that signature and go and examine it on other platforms to understand what it was. So it was prevented. Blocked items wouldn't need any operator intervention straight away. The reason we log them and the reason it's interesting is to know what's happening on your site. And if there was a proliferation of malware suddenly appearing on site, it could indicate that an event is taking place. Maybe there's a concerted attempt to breach your network. But on its own, that one's not a worry. So I'll mark that as resolved. All finished as far as the malware event's concerned. That'll return the interface to normal. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run AlphaCrypt instead. Now AlphaCrypt is not a known piece of malware. It's part of a current malware campaign. It's ransomware. What it will do is attempt to encrypt all the files on my system. And because it's not got a signature, they produce new versions of it every week, it will not be detected by the block mechanism. So I'm going to run this and we'll detect it, hopefully, as part of the malicious component, so as a part of its behavior. And in fact, there we are. At this point, if we had a policy which kill and quarantine, we would already have stopped this malware. It would have been killed, quarantined, and an alert generated. It would have appeared in mitigated. However, I had the policy set to alert only to allow us to carry out the forensics. So here on the system, it's still running and it wants to delete the shadow copy service. So I'm going to say yes to that because users typically wouldn't know what that means. And that's it. We now have the typical ransomware component. Here my pictures have gone, my Excel files have gone, PDFs, all of those things have been encrypted. And I get the message on screen with the demand for Bitcoin to be paid within a certain time period, 95 hours in this case. So back over to here, this allows me to show off the forensics capability. If I do analyze, we can see where the file is. It's on this particular device and it's in this directory. It was on the desktop. We can see there's not much information about it. It was an unknown piece of malware, so it was detected by behavioral analysis. We can see it made connections, so it made 2 connections to the States, 2 to the UK, 1 to Germany, and 2 to Romania. We can see the behaviors it demonstrated that made us understand that this was malware. Some network activity, stealthiness, anti-detection, exploitation, persistence, etc. So these are the kinds of behaviors we saw that at runtime that made us think it's malware. We go to the attack storyline, I can see this is me running Explorer. I ran AlphaCrypt. AlphaCrypt started to run. It created a copy of itself. It then, in the command shell, ran a command shell in the background, and that command shell was used to delete the original copy. That then created a new executable, and that executable was then used to attack the virtual shadow copy service. And among, let's see what files, nothing with that one, it's probably this one then. You can see the events. Here's where it went for files on the system. So it's moving files, writing to files, modifying files. And we can see exactly which components were touched by that system. In fact, we have the full forensics. If we go to the bottom, we have the full raw data of everything that was happening during that attack. And that can be downloaded very simply. That can be downloaded in different formats for analysis in other tools if you wish. But I've seen enough. I can see that this is malware. That begs the question, is there anything I can do about it? So here's the poor user. Remember, the policy was alert only. It didn't attempt to kill or quarantine it because that's what I'd told it not to do. So if I go back to here, what options do I have in terms of actions? I could manually carry out any action that could have been in the automatic policy. Kill, quarantine, remediate, or rollback. In this case, because we've lost files, it's clear that what we need is rollback. So what I'm going to do is carry out the rollback operation. So here on the endpoint, it will kill the running processes, not just the initial process, but any additional processes that were run. It will quarantine the component to prevent it running again. You'll see it's disappeared from the desktop. And it will also remediate and roll back the system if I try to restart it. So there we are. We have all of our files back, and the system is back to a known good state. The desktop, by the way, even the desktop has actually been recovered. If I do a restart, the desktop will go back to normal. It's a peculiarity of Windows that when you change that desktop, it doesn't apply until either the user logs off or you do a restart. Back on our interface, we can see that the event was mitigated. So it moved to a mitigated state as that rollback action, kill, quarantine, remediate, and rollback was carried out. And there it is on the interface. And with a policy of kill, quarantine, that is where you would see events take place. And you'd see most of them as blocked and mitigated. Only if you had an alert or an alert and kill policy would you see anything appear inactive. So that's it. That demonstrates our capability. I'll hand back now, if that's okay, to yourselves and to Danny for any questions.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions regarding that? If you've got any questions, enter them into the questions box down at the in the control panel, and I'll pose them to Tony, and we can address any of your queries. Certainly, I think the dynamic behavioral analysis is a great way for us to be able to manage and move on from the legacy kind of I know what it looks like kind of approach. So I think this is it's certainly the way forward, and certainly you'll see in future episodes of the webinar series that we'll look at the behaviours of people and how they can become clever. But we certainly want to be able to look at the system helping to protect the users when they are not clever in the future. So thanks very much for Tony for that. I really appreciate it. I'm just briefly going to spend a couple of moments explaining where Prodec and Excedia sit. Both companies are part of the Barstone Group, established in 1997. We now have a group of companies to provide all of the range of services that are required. There's SCT, which is a channel service company that provides down to 2-hour hardware to site support. Through this company, we support basically the country's second largest Cisco Gold partner, and are able to deliver service and support with 2-hour SLAs. We have Prodec Networks, who many of you will be familiar with, founded in 1998, and basically the integration company. We have Network 24, which is part of the infrastructure and services group of companies. HTL, Hosting Techniques Limited, we have our own 3 data centers, and we have relationships through those with the likes of BT, TalkTalk, and other service providers and mitigators. Excedia, which I run as part of the group, and which is solely dedicated to education. All of the engineers within Excedia are DBS accredited. And finally, an exciting new announcement about Simstore, which is a storage solutions and professional services company, which completes our picture as an overall complete services and solutions group. Prodec itself is broken down into sort of solution areas based around enterprise services, your server and disaster recovery requirements, the infrastructure and network switches, routers, unified communications and hosted solutions. You'll see there that I put security services not as a distinct separate pillar of activity, but the way we try to approach all of our solutions is to ensure that the security services are built in. So part of an example to that is when we're providing, say, curriculum or admin support to schools. One of the things we like to try and do is make sure that the servers are protected by SentinelOne to protect the non-click clever school users from ransomware attacks. There's an interesting blog that I did not too long ago about why people are actually, why there are 350,000 new pieces of malware every single day, and it puts me in mind of the old Brooklyn bank robber from the 1940s and 50s, a guy called Willie Sutton, who when he was arrested, a journalist asked him for some insight into why he robs banks, and the simple answer was, well, that's where the money is. And if you look at the market value nowadays of personally identifiable information, it's roughly about 47, 48 pence, depending on who you are. And you can see even the small companies, they hold enough personally identifiable information to create a good business case for hackers to try and steal your data. Everything that we do is supported by a managed service, 24/7 managed service desk downstairs. It's UK based, with engineers all around the country, and the owners of the Barstone Group, Russell Barley and Greg Stone, are believe passionately about providing good business and good service, which I hope some of you on the call will be able to testify for us. Here's an example of some of the customers that we have. There are many more. We've got in the region of 4,000 customers providing services, whether it's for security, wireless, switching, routing, and it comes from all sectors and all areas of the country. In terms of today's ransomware, well, in terms of the series of ransomware and what you should do, we've looked today at how you can prevent the nefarious behavior of files and code. We are planning to do another one which looks at how we can assist our your users in becoming more clever, i.e. not to click on that piece of that unknown piece of file or that unknown URL, or not to insert that USB stick or disk into their computer. I know many companies have a series of policies, but if you can't measure, you can't manage. And the Click Clever process, which you can see some of the tools that we have available at www.clickclever.co.uk, and there are resources there for measuring and improving your staff's behaviour. And an example of that is a simple little flowchart that we've put together, which looks rudimentary, but actually, whilst it's a blinding flash and bleeding obvious, has actually helped many of our customers. I know one of my members of staff took it home to her parents, and they realised that the parent had been communicating with Group N, not Groupon, and that it was only this process that allowed her to identify those mistakes. Like I say, www.clickclever.co.uk, or go through the product website for a series of resources. So with that, I'd like to close. If there are any questions, please raise the questions in the questions box below. Let's see, we have one from Alan. Oh, bear with me, let's try and... I assume the ransomware components can work alongside other AV products. Tony, would you like to respond to that one? I think the answer is yes.
Indeed.
I think I'll let you work with that one.
More than happy to. Yes, we're happy to work alongside other antivirus agents. Obviously, there's impact on the system then because you've still got the overhead of your antivirus as well as our component. But it's worth remembering we are a fully certified antivirus replacement. We can be used in any situation where antivirus is required. And in fact, Netflix, the largest online TV company, did exactly that. They have removed their current antivirus, and we are their only AV component on their servers and on their endpoint systems. Quite often we run concurrently with existing antivirus until the end of the current cycle for that AV component. And I guess it's people building up trust in the capability of our system, but we don't need the antivirus there, but we can work with it.
Perfect. Thanks to Gary for that question. Question from Alan: does the system alert the admin via email?
Ah, yes. Would it be possible to chuck screen control back to me, and I will show the change. Seeing is better than words, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, hopefully you can see the dashboard on screen. If I go to Settings down at the bottom and go to Notifications, you can tune the kinds of events that you want to generate the different kinds of notifications. We provide, if you use the cloud version of our product, we provide a free SMS gateway, so you can have SMS alerting, and here, for example, an active malware component like I was demonstrating earlier would generate an SMS alert. You can have email alerts for other things, mitigated, suspicious, for example, and everything can be sent to a syslog server. And configuring those components is really, really easy. Here under recipients, I simply put the telephone numbers of the people I want to receive SMS, the email address here, and the syslog host here, and you can choose various syslog formats. As well as these obvious integrations, we also provide a full API. So it's a RESTful API allowing every single function that you've seen here to be accessed from a third-party tool if you wish, so you could integrate it into other systems. The whole of this interface is actually created using our API.
Lovely, thank you for that. Do you want to hand back over to me just to finish off?
Certainly, certainly. 1 second. There we go.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'd just like to close off by thanking you all for attending. Appreciate your time. And just one parting thought is, whilst you may not have been attacked today through one of these 350,684.92 new pieces of malware, come midnight we start all over again. So in the olden days, in my days of the military, it was a case of we have to be lucky all the time, they only have to be lucky once. So we need to stay on top of it. If anybody has any further questions and don't feel like it now, then please by all means drop me an email, danny.williams@prodec.co.uk, or tweet me on @DannyWilliamsSec. And I'd be delighted to work with you and help answer any questions. If you would like to get a more in-depth demo on SentinelOne or have a look at proof of concept, please by all means contact me and we'll take it further. So, Tony, any further questions from you at all?
No, nothing from me. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you very much, and look forward to the next session. Take care. Bye for now.